And that's what our guest speaker is really going to talk about today. He's going to explain why apologetics is important and why we should be dedicating our time to this. So having said that, I'll kick it off to you, Tim Barnett.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, first off, and congratulations. I want to say this right up front. Congratulations on starting this ministry less than a week ago on Tuesday. So that's phenomenal. And I really want to say just from the outset how inspired I am. A couple young guys starting this ministry. Man, when I was your age, I didn't even know what apologetics was. Okay. I think I was about 22, 23 when I really discovered this world that we're going to kind of dive into today. So thank you guys for having me on here. And I pray that God just continues to, bless this ministry. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen here because I got some slides. Let me make sure this is all set up. And, okay, good. Sweet. All right. So you don't have, I don't know if you guys will be able to see my slides. You'll maybe be able to see my face. You don't need to see my face during this thing. Maybe you don't want to see my face. Let's start this way because, I travel a lot for my job. Okay. And so I tell people some days I wish I had a normal job. It's usually when I'm sitting down next to someone on an airplane, okay? And then they ask that question. It never fails. What do you do for a living? It's kind of hard to explain, okay? They're like, there's no short answer to the question. My job isn't self-explanatory. Some jobs are. Everyone knows, broadly speaking, what a police officer is. Okay. Everybody knows what a plumber is. Everybody knows what a pastor is. But most people don't know what an apologist is. And even after you explain what an apologist is, they want to know, why would anyone do that? Like, why would anyone do that for a living? In other words, why apologetics? Why apologetics? And so that's what I want to talk about. Now, there's kind of a corny joke that we typically apologists like to make. We say apologetics is not going around saying, "I'm so sorry, I'm a Christian," right? No, we make other people sorry we're Christians. No, actually, we don't do that either. Okay. Apologetics, and I hope this graphic can illustrate this. It's a branch of theology. Okay. It's a branch of theology that concerns itself with giving a reason or a defense for the Christian faith. Okay. And so that's what we do. Now, apologetics, we could say, can be broken into, sorry, I have a desk that seems to have a mind of its own. It actually goes up and down, which is really cool. I got to stay off the buttons though, or that's trouble. There's two kind of sub-disciplines of apologetics. There's positive apologetics and negative apologetics, okay? There's offense and there's defense, okay? So positive apologetics, that's about giving positive reasons for Christianity. That's the offense. So we might say we give arguments for God's existence or for the Bible or for the resurrection. That's positive apologetics. There's also negative apologetics. That's defense, not offense. And it answers kind of the negative challenges against Christianity. So we might answer the problem of evil, or we may respond to alleged Bible contradictions or something like that. Okay, so there's positive and there's negative apologetics. Now, here's what I want you to imagine when you think of apologetics. Okay, I want you to imagine a lawyer standing in front of a judge and jury making a case for their position, because that's essentially what an apologist does. They give reasons, they give arguments and counter arguments. They are trying to be persuasive. They're trying to make their case. And so you could think of apologetics as making a case. Now, in this talk, we're not going to do apologetics proper. Like, I'm not going to argue for the existence of God or the reliability of the Bible or whatever. I'm not going to do that. What I want to do is I want to make the case for making a case. I want to give an apologetic for apologetics. Okay. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. Apologetics, there's some people that just are hostile and don't like apologetics. We're going to talk a little bit more about this as we go here, but here's just one example. In a book called The End of Faith by Myron Penner, he says this. He says, apologetics itself might be the single biggest threat to genuine Christian faith that we face today. Now, those are strong words. In fact, he goes on to say this. In his book, The End of Apologetics, he says, this book is about apologetics, or more precisely, it is a book against apologetics. Now, there's something really ironic about his book. He's making a case against making a case, right? He's giving an apologetic against apologetics. But here's my point. This idea of this hostility towards apologetics, you're going to see it in the church. If you're a Christian watching and you're in a church and you ask about starting an apologetics group, you may meet some hostility, and it may be because they've read something like The End of Faith, which, by the way, won an award in 2014 from Christianity Today in the subcategory of apologetics and evangelism, which I thought was a little bit funny. So here's what I want to do. I want to actually give you kind of 4 points that you can remember for why apologetics matters. And it goes like this. I didn't invent these. Actually, one of my former professors, Norm Geisler, he was my professor at Southern Evangelical Seminary when I was doing my master's degree. He put it this way. He says, the Bible commands it, the culture demands it, the church needs it, and the results confirm it. Okay? So 4 arguments, 4 points. The Bible commands it, the culture demands it, the church needs it, and the results confirm it. So let's go through each one of these. The Bible commands it. Apologetics, let me say this, okay, right up front. Apologetics is not optional, okay? Every follower of Christ is instructed, commanded to do apologetics. Now, you might be thinking, well, where does it say that? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here's a few verses, okay? For example, probably the most often cited verse on apologetics comes from the Apostle Peter. Okay, he's writing to Christians in Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey, and they're facing intense persecution. And he encourages them to be ready to engage those who oppose the gospel. And here's what he says. In your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that is in you, yet do this with gentleness and respect. That last part is really important. Gentleness and respect. We got to have good character when we're answering, when we're ready to make a defense. But you need to understand that word defense is the word in Greek apologia, which is where we get the word apologetics, okay? Peter's not the only one who uses apologia. In fact, the word that is translated defense there is used 8 times in the New Testament, and every time it means a formal defense. In fact, usually that's what Paul's doing in the book of Acts. Brothers and fathers, hear the defense that I now make before you. He's making a defense. He's like standing in front of, often in front of people who want to persecute him, or he's on trial or whatever. And so there's just some examples. So here's another. He uses the same word, and he says that he was put here in defense and confirmation of the gospel. So he's defending the gospel. He's giving an apologia for the gospel. Or how about Colossians 4? I love these words. Same idea here. Walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best use of your time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. Okay, so walk in wisdom, be smart. Let your speech be gracious, be nice. And then, of course, that last part. So you may know how you ought to answer each person. And we should be able to answer each person. Or this one's a favorite of mine. The weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. And then he says this, we destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. So our job as the apologist is to destroy arguments, not the arguer. We destroy opinions, not the people who hold the opinions. Okay. And that's really, really clear. Okay. We got to make sure we get that straight. And then Jude says that we're appealing to contend for the faith. Okay. So you have all these different words here, all really, really important. Now, the Bible, it seems to me, is pretty clear, but if you march into most churches, and I'm on staff, I'm not beating up on the church here, okay? I'm just trying to report what I think is going on. If you walk into most churches in North America, what you will find, if you ask them, what do you guys teach on apologetics? They will look at you probably like you have three heads, okay? Because apologetics is at worst, okay? An extra at best, like, oh, sure, we can do apologetics here. We'll give you the closet and you can have your class, that kind of thing. Or maybe they'll say, no, get out of here. We don't want any of that stuff in our church. Okay, so whether it's apathy on the one hand or animosity on the other, I think this is actually rooted in, it's fueled by anti-intellectualism. Anti-intellectualism. Let me just say a couple things about anti-intellectualism, because I think that apologetics is a direct counter to this. In the book called The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind, Mark Knoll says this: the scandal of the evangelical mind is that there is not much of an evangelical mind. Okay, there isn't much of one. And I think he's right. Most Christians don't think very deeply. William Lane Craig, he's a pretty well-known Christian philosopher. And in his book, Reasonable Faith, he says, our churches are filled with Christians who are idling in intellectual neutral. He says, as Christians, their minds are going to waste. One result of this is an immature, superficial faith. People who simply ride the roller coaster of emotional experience are cheating themselves out of a deeper, richer Christian faith by neglecting the intellectual side of that faith. And so if you want a deep and rich faith, don't neglect the intellectual side of it. And this is where apologetics comes in. Years ago, over 40 years ago, Christianity Today had an article by Charles Malik, and he says this. This is 40 years ago. I must be frank with you. The greatest danger confronting American evangelical Christianity is the danger of anti-intellectualism. The mind in its greatest and deepest reaches is not cared for enough. Caring for the Christian mind is the job of apologetics. So unsurprisingly, it's the uncared for Christian mind that leads to the undoing of Christian faith. The uncared for Christian mind, and I'm going to come back to this, leads to the undoing of Christian faith. Okay, really important. And so the real danger isn't apologetics, as Myron Penner, that quote in his book, The End of Apologetics, that he asserted. No, that's not right. Nothing could be further from the truth. I think one of the real problems in the church is this anti-intellectualism. Let me say this. If you want to know the mind of God, you need to learn to use your own. If you want to know people are always like, I want to know I want to know God's thoughts. I want to know God's will. If you want to know the mind of God, you got to start thinking harder. You got to start learning to use your own mind. So the Bible commands it. This is the first point. And this is really important because those who refuse to make a defense, contend for the faith, destroy arguments, answer each person, if you fail to do those things, you are disobeying God. You're disobeying God. So the Bible, why apologetics? Someone asked me, Tim, why is apologetics important? The Bible commands it. And that, by the way, is enough. Case closed. We could end the presentation right now. But I'm going to give you 3 more, okay? How about these? Not only does the Bible command it, but the culture demands it. Implicitly and explicitly, okay? Both. The culture demands it. What do I mean? Well, the late philosopher and theologian, Francis Schaeffer, he referred to apologetics as pre-evangelism, to the culture. This idea is that God is going to use well-reasoned arguments and answers as a springboard to see people reached with the gospel. Okay, really, really exciting. Alistair McGrath, who's an Oxford theologian, really smart guy. I think he has multiple PhDs. One's in science. He's also a theologian. He wrote a book called Mere Apologetics. And I love this. He says, apologetics lays the ground for the invitation, and then evangelism extends it. Okay, apologetics lays the ground, and then evangelism extends it. And so apologetics and evangelism work together. They are 2 sides of the same coin, if you will. I think Frank Turek, he likes to say, how do you spell evangelism? And then he starts spelling the word apologetics, APOL, and he goes on. I mean, and it's true. If you want to do evangelism today, you are going to be doing apologetics. I mean, it's the people who say, just do evangelism. Those people have never done evangelism, because when you start doing evangelism, you find out that you end up also doing apologetics, because people have questions. So the invitation, of course, is the evangelism, but the conversations that we have are usually apologetic conversations. Here's an analogy. I don't think I made this up. This might have been in McGrath's book. He says, imagine you're out on the street and someone, a stranger, you've never met them, they walk over to you and they offer you bread. Okay, here's bread. And here's my question. Would you take it? Some stranger on the street offered you a piece of bread. Would you take it? Well, if you're like me, you might have some questions, right? You might say, oh, well, where's this bread from? Who made it? Who's the baker? These kind of questions. How long, when was it made? You'd have all kinds of questions, that go along with it. That's the apologetic side. We answer those. Before I take the bread to eat it, I need to get some answers to certain questions, right? Should I trust the person who made it? How do I know they didn't put poison in it? This kind of thing. How do I know it's good to eat? What if it tastes, so I'm going to have these questions. By the way, when we start talking about, the gospel and God and what he's done in salvation, it makes no sense to talk about the Son of God who, communicates the word of God, who performs acts of God, who brought salvation of God, if there is no God. All that rests on a foundation. And that's what apologetics does. It helps lay the foundation so that people can understand what we're talking about when we share the gospel with them. I keep doing that. I don't know why. There we go. It's like we're playing peekaboo with you guys or something. It's crazy. I normally don't sit in this corner. That's why if I go over to the other side, it's really bright in my window. And so I had to tuck myself into this corner. And now I'm playing peekaboo. It's awesome. So here's the thing. And I think most people would agree with this. The culture is influenced by certain philosophies. Okay. And I think right now there's a couple different philosophies that dominate. Relativism, the idea that there is no truth. Pluralism, religious pluralism, the idea that there is no religious truth. All roads lead to God. Naturalism, that's the idea that there's no supernatural truth. There's just nature is all there is. And so that's the cultural water that we swim in, whether we realize it or not. Okay, those are dominant philosophies. Now, do you see the problem of doing evangelism in this culture? There's going to be a big problem, right? Because we are to a relativistic culture. We're trying to present an exclusivist message to a pluralistic culture. We have a supernatural view, and we're presenting that to a naturalistic culture. You see how none of that makes sense. We shouldn't be surprised when they respond by saying, well, how can Jesus be the only way? Right? You say, well, come to Jesus. He will save you from your sins. And they say, but why would Jesus be the only way? Or they say, who are you to force you say, well, we're all sinners. And they say, who are you to force your morality on me? Right? Like, because they're assuming relativism. Or they say something like, well, science has shown that miracles are impossible. All of those would result from their worldview. I call these, by the way, gospticles. I don't know why. It's not a real word. It's just maybe fun to say. But it makes the point that, there are obstacles to the gospel that are out there. And that's why apologetics matters, because what apologetics does is it removes those obstacles, those gospticles. Okay. And so, the idea goes back 100 years ago. Famous theologian, J. Gresham Machen, Princeton theologian, he said, false ideas are the greatest obstacles to the reception of the gospel. Under such circumstances, what God desires us to do is destroy the obstacle at its root. So we're removing gospticles. They're obstacles to the gospel. So there you go. That's where the word comes from. Now, we've got the Bible commands it. The culture demands it. But here's another thing. So if you want to do evangelism, you need to know apologetics. But the church also needs it. And this is where I kind of coined this phrase. I'm hoping it catches on, okay? Francis Schaeffer called apologetics pre-evangelism to the culture. I think that apologetics is post-evangelism to the church. And what I mean by that, post, like after. Like once you become a Christian, the challenges don't just disappear. The struggles, those don't just disappear. They don't evaporate. Those same people have the same questions, right? Even though they're now in the church. And so I call it post-evangelism, because as a Christian, I need apologetics too. And so just so you get some of the stats here, and we could spend like all day on this, but I won't. There's about 3 in every 5 young people disconnect from the church by the age of 15. 3 in 5. That's an alarming statistic, although this is not a new phenomenon, okay? Even you go back to the book of Judges, chapter 2, and all the generation also were gathered to their father. So a whole generation passed away. Then it says this, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the works that he had done for Israel. It took one generation, and the people abandoned God and went to idols. And so this is not a new thing, okay? This has been happening for hundreds of years, right? And so it's happened in the time of Judges, and it's happening today. And so how do we stop this? How do we curb the exodus of young people who leave the church, who grew up in the church and leave? And the answer is, well, one answer is apologetics, okay? One answer is apologetics. About a decade, it was about a decade ago, or more than that. There was a study done by Barna, David Kinnaman, and they actually it was a longitudinal study, and they looked at why young people left the church. And what they ended up doing was Christianity Today summarized this 6 reasons in 6 words, okay? And the words were isolationism, shallowness, anti-science, sex, exclusivity, and then doubters. Okay, those are the 6 words they used. And what basically these words stand for is isolation. The people who walked away from their faith, the church, they said, I felt too isolated. The church, it doesn't understand the culture. It demonizes the culture, is what they said. They said church is too shallow. Bible teaching was unclear. It wasn't deep enough. My faith was irrelevant. Anti-science. They said, science the Bible and Christianity doesn't make sense of science. They're in conflict. Sex. Look at all these issues from the transgender issue to the homosexuality issue and so on. Look, you guys are too judgmental, too simplistic. Exclusivity. How can Jesus be the only way? Doubters. Church is not a safe place to express my doubts. What I realized was all of these are, at least to some degree or another, are apologetic issues. So this is amazing. And the other thing is, Stand to Reason has been answering these challenges for 20 years, okay, or more. And so have many other apologetics ministries. So these aren't new, but these are the things that we have been addressing. And clearly we need to get the message out. For example, that science and faith are not at odds with each other. But here's the thing. It's not just for the church, like this abstract, we need apologetics in the church. We need it for individuals. And I'm going to give you a practical example. I'm going to give you my own life, my own experience. So 3 years ago, almost to the day, my grandfather passed away. Okay. Now that was a hard year for our family. We lost 3 family members in 1 year. 2018, we lost 3 family members, and I lost a very close friend. He was in his 40s, had a brain tumor, and he passed away. So that was 4 people. Now, the morning after my grandfather passed away, I was driving to the airport off to an apologetic conference, going to fly to Dallas, and I was overwhelmed with doubts. Okay. Now, I want to explain more. So the night before, I had this amazing opportunity that I think was God ordained. Okay. And I don't say that lightly. I had the opportunity for about an hour to sit down with my grandfather, explain the gospel to him, and he repented and believed. It was unbelievable. Okay. I was shocked, to be honest. In fact, I presented the gospel to him. We talked about it. And then when I prayed for him, I actually repeated everything I had just said, because I wanted to make sure he understood what he was saying, what he was committing himself to. And it was unreal. The next morning, I'm driving to the airport and I'm thinking, who am I to present eternal life to a dying man? Who am I? What do I know? What if I'm wrong about all of this? And it was like paralyzing. It was like a broken record playing in my mind as I'm driving to the airport. Now, the irony wasn't lost on me. Here I am, an apologist, professional apologist. I'm driving to the airport to go speak at an apologetics conference, and I'm feeling overwhelmed by doubt. So here's what I did. I did the only thing I could think of. I did the thing that I train people to do. Okay. I started answering my doubts. I went back to the basics. Remember, we talked about apologetics can lay a good foundation. Well, I started answering my challenge. What do I know? Here's what I know. I know that truth exists. How do I know truth exists? Because to deny truth is to affirm it. Okay. And so truth must exist. Okay. So there's one level. I know God exists. How do I know God exists? Because there's lots of really good arguments. It's not just 1 or 2. A friend of mine, Cameron Bertuzzi, just did a YouTube video of 150 arguments. Now, I don't know if they all go through, but man, that is overwhelming. There's some really good arguments for God. I know the Bible's reliable. I know that Jesus is God. How do I know that? I mean, I teach on this stuff. I'm reiterating for myself. I know Jesus rose from the dead. How do I know this stuff? Is it because I'm special? No. I mean, my mom says I'm special, but it's not because I'm special. Is it because I have some secret insights that no one else does? No. This is stuff that's available to any of us. And so what I realized at the end of the day, apologetics wasn't some abstract thing. It wasn't just something I teach people. I needed it for myself. So the church, Christians like you and me, that's what I'm talking about. We need this because it helps us provide real answers, responses to the reasons that people doubt and the reasons people, frankly, walk away from the church. Okay. So it's very, very, very practical here. So the Bible commands it, the culture demands it, the church needs it, and finally, this will be brief, the results confirm it. The results confirm it. Now, it surprises me that people are so against apologetics, because even if the Bible didn't command it and it wasn't like, the culture didn't demand it and the church didn't need it, I would still probably use it because it actually works. Okay. Now, here's just one instance. Acts 17, 1-4 says this. I'll read it to you. Now, when they had traveled through Amphipolis and Apollonia and came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews, and according to Paul's custom, that's really important. According to Paul's custom, he went to them and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the scriptures. What's he doing? Explaining and giving evidence that the Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead, saying, "This Jesus, whom I proclaim to you, is the Christ." Here's the important part. It says this, "And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, along with a large number of God-fearing Greeks and a number of the leading women." Here's the thing. It was Paul's routine, his custom, to reason with people that he spoke to. And as he reasoned from the scriptures, he was appealing to evidence. That's what it says there. He was making a case. Remember, that's what we said. Apologetics, making a case. Paul was doing apologetics. And as a result, people were persuaded and began to follow Christ. And so this to me is like, wow, this stuff really works. And it didn't just work back then, it works today. There are so many individuals. I mean, there's lots of, kind of famous Christians like Lee Strobel, or Josh McDowell or whoever, C.S. Lewis. Most of us know those names, but there are lots of people. I mean, maybe that's your story too. That's why I left a little circle there, because there's lots of people. I know it's part of my own story. I did grow up in the church, but it was apologetics that really solidified my faith. I was just showing up at church, not really a Christian until I was in my early 20s. It was just kind of a thing we did. I was might call a nominal Christian. I would tell people, yeah, I'm a Christian, but then I'd go party on the weekends and I lived like everybody else. And it was actually through apologetics and obviously the Holy Spirit using that. And we can talk maybe in the Q&A about how the Holy Spirit plays a role, drawing me to a deeper, richer faith. And so at the end of the day, we have many good reasons to be apologists. 1, the Bible commands it, and that's enough. 2, the culture demands it. The culture desperately needs us to be doing this thing. All of us, not just me, not just you, but everybody who's a believer. 3, the church needs it desperately. And that's why we got to get this stuff in the churches. And then finally, the results confirm it. We should be doing it for that reason too. Taken individually, these are reason enough, but when we put them all collectively, like a cumulative case, it's like, wow, why isn't every church doing that? And so hopefully this talk will spur people on to get apologetics into their own church and start doing it with their coworkers and with their neighbors and with their family. All right, let's take some questions. I'll stop sharing my screen here. And
all right, sounds good. Thank you so much. That was awesome. Okay, so yes, so please put questions into the chat box and do us a favor with just putting all caps question so that we can just find them easily through all these comments. So anyone have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to get one off the bat.
Sure.
I've heard that there's an argument for God's existence based on beauty, but I've actually never looked into it. So do you know anything about that, or could you summarize it?
Yeah, I don't know if I could give a syllogism for it, but the idea of objective beauty is kind of like it's a lot like there's a lot of parallels to the argument for like objective morality. Okay. And so it might go something like, if God does not exist, objective beauty does not exist. But then the second premise would deny the consequence. So it would be objective beauty
Okay.
does exist, therefore God exists. So that uses a form of logic called modus tollens. Now, you have to argue for the premises. Now, it seems to me, and I know there's people that deny that objective beauty exists, but there's just, I mean, it's kind of an intuition you have. I don't know how you'd prove the second premise, that objective beauty exists, but it seems to me that when you see something beautiful, you just know, like, it's beautiful. And so it's not, that kind of argument's not going to be persuasive to everybody because it does trade on intuition. Look, my wife, I think, is objectively beautiful. When I see a sunset, it's like, what is it about that? It's like, wow, this is amazing. When that new rover that's on Mars recently took a photograph of the night sky, and it was being shared around the internet, social media. It was amazing. Like it caught a kind of another angle of the Milky Way galaxy. I mean, a picture from an angle that no one has ever taken before. You know, this kind of idea with this crazy resolution. To me, that's beautiful. And the first premise is, well, why would you expect something to be beautiful? I mean, first of all, it just seems like in a godless universe, and again, this would have to be argued for, but in a godless universe where things are really the accidental byproduct of, well, for biology, it would be evolution, but for the cosmos, it's just, that's how it happened. And you can look up and say, wow, okay, but why is that any more beautiful than anything else? So there doesn't seem to be a standard there of beauty. So again, I'm just kind of sketching very briefly what an argument for beauty might look like. But I think there's so much more room for research in this area. It's not very popular to argue from beauty. So, maybe you're listening and you're like, man, I want to take the ball and run with it. There's guys like William Lane Craig, who he's like famous for the Kalam cosmological argument. I don't know if this is right. I heard someone said that his Kalam argument is like the most referenced argument for God in the philosophical papers. Okay, like people are referencing the Kalam argument that William Lane Craig has done his PhD work on. What someone needs to do is do something like that with an argument from beauty, and make a strong case like William Lane Craig has done for the origin of the universe. Make a strong case from beauty. So I don't know if that helps at all, but I'll leave it at that.
Okay, cool. So now we have, looks like 4 or 5 questions in here. I'm just going to do it for whoever asked first. This one says, I was asked recently by an atheist how there could be God if we can create life. I was kind of stumped because I've never heard that before.
That second part, that because we can't create life or because we can create life?
It says because we can, which I don't know, sounds like begging the question, but.
Well, and this is in the chat, right? If I were to scroll.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Let me move this over. So yeah, because it's helpful to actually read it too. Okay, so how could there be a God if we can create life? Here's the thing: we can create. I created 3 lives. They're in my house right now. Actually, one's at grandma's house having a sleepover. So that's probably what they're referring to, because we have never created life like in a laboratory. Not without starting from, now I'm talking about like the origin of life question. Like, how did first life begin? And the reality is scientists don't know. That's the honest answer to that. Apart from like an intelligent designer. And even these intelligent PhD biochemists and people who study origin of life, they don't know how to do it either. Now, it's true, we can take a sperm and an egg and, put those together and make life, like we can make a human being as long as we have some building blocks. Okay. So rather than, the way it normally happens, we can help the process along by, say, in vitro fertilization or something. Okay. But that doesn't disqualify God. Okay. Just because I can do something that God does doesn't mean that therefore God does not exist. So that would be a non sequitur in logic. It doesn't follow. Okay. So just because I can lift a mug in the air and, Arthur can lift a mug in the air doesn't mean I don't exist anymore. It just means we can both do it. Right. So, even if they proved, hey, we can make life in a test tube in the laboratory, that still wouldn't disprove God, right? It would just mean, hey, you did something God did, right? Or maybe God used a natural process or whatever, but it wouldn't disprove his existence. So I would just, if I was talking with that atheist, I would just try to make that real clear that the one thing doesn't disprove the other thing, right? They both could be true. All right. Do you want me to go to the next one here?
Yeah, you probably just go to the next one.
Sure. I see one that says, what will be your answer to a Christian who doesn't want to learn about apologetics? That's a really good question too. So what I would do is, if there's a Christian who didn't want to learn about apologetics, I'd force them to learn about it. No, I wouldn't do that. What I would do is I would go through some of these. This is the point of this talk. I would say, well, I'd ask the Christian, do they believe the Bible? Do they want to follow the instructions of the apostles? And if they said, yeah, then I would go to some of the verses we looked at and say, well, here's where it's commanded. I know you may not want to do it, but it's commanded here, right? We're also commanded to love our neighbor. You could say, well, I don't want to do that. Well, then you got to take that up with God. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is a command. Or, I might ask them about doing evangelism. I may say, let's go do evangelism together. Here's the thing. When I take Christians, we used to take, this before COVID, take Christians, young people to Berkeley on a little mission trip, and where they got challenged. And when Christians, it's interesting, when Christians start to get challenged about their faith, that's when they become interested in apologetics. So I often get asked to come into a church, pretend to be an atheist, and then beat the kids up. And then I reveal that I'm a Christian, and there's such a relief. Oh my goodness. But you should see the kids. When I come in, it's like, hey, here's Tim. We went to college together. He used to be a Christian. Now he's an atheist. He just wants to present his side. Here's some arguments. And I do a full PowerPoint like you just saw. And I do 40 minutes of role play with the atheist. And I do Q&A with them the whole 9 yards, doing my best to be the atheist. Because I want them to feel what it is like to be challenged. Because a lot of Christians have not been challenged, right? So they say, oh, I believe in God. And I'll say, well, how could you believe in a loving God who would send people to hell? Or how can you believe in a loving God when COVID just wiped out 500,000 people in the US? Some loving God, some good God. I want them to feel the weight of that, right? Because let's be honest, those are the sincere challenges that are coming from people who don't believe in God. So that would be another response to that. Let me hop to the next one. A common idea I have heard is that science and Christianity contradict each other. What argument or evidence would you use to go against this idea? I got a Red Pen Logic coming out on Monday on this question. If you guys haven't heard of Red Pen Logic, it's just a really fun video thing that we're doing. We got a 7-minute video basically responding to the challenge that said that Christianity had nothing to do with the origins of science. What I do is, and this is, I don't know why it's not common knowledge. I went to public school. No one told me that guys like Galileo, Johannes Kepler, Blaise Pascal, Robert Boyle, and you just go on the list of all these guys. They're all Christians, most of them. Those were all Christians. Isaac Newton, he denied the deity of Christ. But I mean, he was, all his other views were very in line with the Christian worldview. So they were influenced. The reason they did science was because they were inspired by God. They saw science as an act of worship. Okay. There's a reason why science arose in the West when it did. And it was because of Christians, not just believers in God. It wasn't Africa or India or any other places. It happened in a particular place with certain people. And what the historians of science tell us is because of their theology. It was essential to science. And now what the atheist wants to say is, we don't need science. We don't need Christianity anymore. Well, it's like, okay, but you wouldn't be here. It's like you saying, well, I don't need my parents anymore. Well, maybe you don't anymore, but you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for your parents, right? And what I would say is science still needs the Christian assumptions, like an orderly universe. Well, where'd that come from? Your rational mind. Well, where'd that come from? I mean, you just go on the list of all the different qualities. So that would be a good place to start for that question. How would you approach the New Age influences in today's culture and even the church? And how would you respond to people who say that there's no absolute truth? Like people who say there's no absolute truth is actually stating absolute truth. Yeah, LOL. I'm with you on that. So they contradict themselves. Yeah. So Stephanie, good. I mean, you're pretty much responding to your own second question there. If someone says there is no truth, my response is to ask a question, because questions are better than statements. And you're going to ask them, is that true? Is it true that there is no truth? This is not a word game. It's not a trick. It's because the reason we all kind of laugh, like you LOL'd, and I want to laugh out loud too, is because it is self-refuting, and self-refuting claims are funny. Like if I said, my brother is an only child. My brother is an only child. You would say, okay, something's wrong here, Tim. If he's your brother, he ain't an only child, right? Because you're his brother. Yeah, exactly. So or if I said, I can't speak a word in English, you would say, Tim, you just spoke in English. Yeah, I refuted myself. So if someone says there is no truth, they just made a truth claim that they think is true. So you're going to ask them, is that true? The first part about the New Age stuff, I haven't done a lot of, study in New Age. I think there's some really good YouTubers out there who are responding to this stuff, but we need to be very careful, because you're right. New Age influence is in the church. I'll tell you where it is. And I do have some experience with this, is in the word of faith stuff. Like name it and claim it, blab it and grab it, that stuff, the power of your words, that goes back to New Age. So it's been Christianized, say what you want, not what you have. My father-in-law, who passed away from cancer, 61 years old, 63 years old. He was buying into some of this stuff, and we had long conversations, and he, I mean, at the end of his life, I think he realized, because he couldn't just name and claim cancer out of his body. It doesn't work like that. Okay. You can't just use your power of your words. Like God spoke the universe into existence, so we can speak things into existence. No, we can't. We don't have that ability. We are not little gods. We are made in God's image, but we are not little gods. So there's a whole lot of stuff you got to watch out for. New Age is getting into the church. I can't say much more about that, because it's not really a field that I've gone deep into, but I hear you. Question, in your experience, what seems to be the most powerful argument an atheist can make against the existence of God? I think the most rhetorically powerful argument is the problem of evil. If God is good and God is powerful and God is all-knowing, I mean, these are the attributes of God, then why is there so much evil and suffering in the world? And where it really hits home, I just watched a funeral of a friend, a woman who used to work at our church years ago. She passed away from cancer, and they just had the funeral this morning. And because of COVID, there's so many restrictions that I couldn't even attend the funeral because of size limitations and stuff. So it was mostly people watching online. And it's like, I'm watching that. It's like, God, here's this faithful woman. She worked in children's ministry for like 20 years. We prayed for her. I prayed for her. Why didn't you do something on it? You could have healed this woman. Why didn't you? And that, to me, that's a hard pill to swallow. Emotionally, that's hard to swallow. Now, I don't think the argument goes through. I think there are good arguments that he does exist that kind of outweigh the problem of evil. And I think the problem of evil has answers. Like, this is a fallen world, right? That's part of the problem. I mean, and we know when it gets solved. It gets solved. It starts in Genesis 3 and gets solved 66 books later. Okay. But that's not now, that's coming. And so we do have, and we know that suffering produces in us something good. We know that God can work all things together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. So there's all these truths that we can bring to bear on this challenge that's very difficult. And I have a whole talk on it. You may want to just search Tim Barnett on YouTube and put "If God, Why Evil?" I don't know if you'd find it on there. Maybe we'll come back and do another session on evil or something. But that, to me, is the hardest challenge. Not necessarily intellectually, but it is an intellectual challenge too. But emotionally, man, it is hard to deal with because we've all experienced evil and suffering, and we just look up to God and we say, "Where are you? Where are you right now?" Okay. How about this one? Do you know about the different types of apologetics, like classical, presuppositional, existential approaches? Which one do you use? I do. I'm familiar with the different approaches. I think they all, at different times have value, to be honest. I would consider myself a classical apologist. I kind of do the two-step where if they're an atheist, I go to God's existence first. And then, but if they're not an atheist, let's say they believe in God, they're just not a Christian, then I'm going to go to the resurrection. Okay. So it's just like two main arguments: God's existence, resurrection. Call that your apologetic two-step. Okay. And to me, it's a pretty effective approach. Presuppositional has its place at times. And we all have presuppositions. I don't buy into the whole thing, but my first exposure to apologetics was some of the presuppositional guys, Greg Bonson and some of these other guys. And some of these guys are pretty sharp. So whatever, it's like Paul says, he became all things to all men so that he might win some. And so look at if it's an existential kind of argument that's going to work with this person, or maybe it's a classical, or maybe it's precept, I don't know. I'm going to feel it out and see what approach is the best. Different people are going to be more receptive to different approaches. Oh yeah, someone just mentioned James Tour. He has a YouTube thing going on. Okay, James Tour is like, man, when it comes to nanotechnology, he is like the scientist, okay? And so he started doing research into origin of life. So if you want to understand the origin of life, you got to look up James Tour. I think he's at Rice University. This guy is a bona fide scientist. Like, he is respected, man, from whatever your religious point of view, but he is a hardcore Christian. And so he's doing a series right now. If you were to type in Origin of Life, James Tour on YouTube, you'd probably see like multiple sessions where he's going through all the problems that you encounter when you try to get the origin of life naturalistically without intelligent design. And so that would be okay. No, okay. I mean, having kids. Yeah, we talked about that. So yeah, we can have kids. God is part of that process. By the way, God uses natural means to accomplish ends. So like he didn't, the sperm that I was created from, like the sperm and egg, here's a little, sex ed 101. I don't think God like created that sperm supernaturally, like, right? No, that was one of the sperm, 300 million. And then the egg, that my, and then when they came together, I was produced. And so God uses this natural process to create. So it's like we're partners in that creative process. I keep hitting this thing. It's freaking me out. Okay. That's like the highlight, is how many times am I going to hit this button over here?
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I know we have to let you go in just a minute. So
Sure.
We do 2 final questions for you.
Sure. Yeah.
First, what would be your advice for someone just getting into the world of apologetics? Like, what would you tell yourself back when you had just started? And then what would be your 2 book recommendations to someone who hasn't really read anything on it?
Okay. Let me do the second one first. The book recommendations, before I forget, I want to strongly recommend the book Tactics. Okay. If you are going to do apologetics, you need to read the book Tactics. Now, it's going to sound a little self-serving. I didn't write the book, but I work for the author. Okay. So Greg Kokel's my boss. Greg Kokel's the author. But if you type in Tactics, I'm telling you, I haven't met a single person who read that book and said, and didn't say, wow, like this is a game changer. So that would be a good place to start, because most of us are thinking, I'm too nervous to talk to someone about my faith or engage in these conversations. Tactics helps take all that pressure off. You don't have to know everything. You don't really have to know much either. You just ask questions, right? That's the approach. It's questions. Someone says there is no truth. Is that true? Okay. That's a Columbo question. That's a question that's in the book. And so I won't go into, I could do a whole talk on tactics right now. I'm going to resist. Okay. So that's one. Maybe as a second book, I'm trying to think related just to apologetics. I kind of like the book Mere Apologetics by Os Guinness. I'm sorry, by Alistair McGrath at Oxford University. He does a good job at laying out what apologetics is. I think he might even go into the different kinds of apologetics, classical versus whatever. And he talks about the distinction between evangelism. And he's just a brilliant theologian. And like I mentioned before, I think he has 2 PhDs. So he understands the science stuff too. I think he goes into God's existence in the book as well. So that might be a good intro book. So I'll leave those. So those are good ones. And then the first question was the advice to someone just kind of starting out. Here's the thing. First point is just start doing it. Don't wait. You're always going to feel like you don't know enough. Okay. Even when I sit down with an atheist, it's the same. It's like, man, I wish I had read, I've read this, and this. I wish I had read that, and that, like I still have more to learn, but that is always going to be the case. Always, even when you feel really comfortable with a topic, there's always something. And so the first thing would be just start doing it. Take what you're learning and start applying it. So that might mean doing talks like you guys are doing, man. I saw that. I didn't watch the full thing, but I saw that there was one on Tuesday. And I'm encouraged. You guys are going to have more presentations. That's awesome. Like just start doing it. And what I found in my own ministry, and so I can't promise this, but this is how it's worked for me. Because I don't think I'm that special. I'm just this Canadian here who's, I was a teacher, and I fell in love with doing apologetics. And I told God, you give me something to do, I'll do it. And I got invited to the church. Hey, Tim, can you do my pastor came to me. Could you do a series, and on pro-life? That's what he wanted. I'm like, you know what? I haven't really looked into it too much, but I'll buy a few books. I did a whole course, 6 sessions. And then that led to something, someone who attended that. And all of a sudden I'm at a conference with Sean McDowell. He's the keynote speaker. And I'm just doing a breakout. And I came up to him and said, hey, Sean, I'm here. I got invited to do a breakout. It'd be cool if you came and heard my talk. He came and listened to me. Honestly, I think I couldn't have planned any of this. And what happened, we go out for dinner that night. He's like, Tim, I want to take you out for dinner. We go out for dinner. At the end of our conversation, he says, I'm going back to California. And we're going to stay in touch because I want to help you. And I'm thinking, help? How? What? So he leaves. I didn't hear from him for a few months. And sure enough, he talked to Stand to Reason. And I got an email from Brett Kunkel, who's now started his own thing. And it was amazing. I'm like, how is this possible? Look at bloom. This is what Greg Kokel says. He says, bloom where you're planted. Bloom where you're planted. And what he means by that is just God's given you some sphere of influence. It may not be very big. Just use the gifts that God has given you. And what happens is he adds to it. That's been my experience. He's given me more and more and more. And I'm grateful for it. And so that, and then maybe a third thing is just remember to be humble, like stay humble. I'm a little frustrated and discouraged, watching conversations on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And these are Christians who just like are at each other's throats some of the time. And it's just so frustrating to me that, some of them are quite young. And I'm just thinking, like, I think of myself as a young guy. I'm 37, but I just think, man, I was probably like that at that age too. I remember staying up till 3 a.m. debating my Christian friends on different issues, and I wish someone had told me, look, Tim, you might be wrong. Okay. Show more grace, be more humble, and you may retain those friendships, and you may have more of an impact, because the gentleness and respect part, I wasn't good at. Okay. I'll be real honest. I was more interested in finding the flaw in the argument and like destroying the argument. And if it meant destroying my friendships and destroying the person, well, then, so be it. So that would be another key piece of advice, is just remember, look, your views are going to change. There are fundamentals that we base our faith on, but there are other views that, and I've changed. And I won't go into all of them today, but there are things that, have moved from here to there, and I found more persuasive, and things I'm more on the fence now. And I wish that more apologists would take that approach.
Cool. Thank you. That was awesome. All right. Well, we should do this again at some point. If you ever want to come back in the future,
you guys you guys let Darcy know, and I'd be happy to. This was a lot of fun. I think tactics would be a really cool thing to do, or like the problem of evil or one of these other things. But yeah, anytime.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thank you for coming.